Thank you for joining us again. How's it going, Shaun?
Yeah, great. It's been an awesome week. Just for our viewers, we live in the tropics. We live in Singapore. And if you've never been to Singapore, it's basically 85% humidity and hot every day, 365 days a year. So it's great, but it's sweaty.
It's very sweaty.
So we thought we'd start off today by talking a little bit about our name again and being the Iceberg Mountain. The iceberg part of that name is really about challenging the status quo. And it comes from a quote from Casey Neistat where he's talking about how the haters and the people that downgrade creative people's ideas are people who are sipping champagne on the top floor of the Titanic as it's like barreling towards the iceberg. And in the video he's like, we are the iceberg. We don't want to scuttle education. We don't want to take it down. But at the same time, we want to give people the opportunity to discuss and think about ideas that might reorientate some ways that we do things in education to make it a better experience for kids. And that's what it really comes back to, is like, what's going to make a really engaging and exciting education for kids where they'll take away their skills they need for the future.
Yeah, and today's iceberg basically is how do we reduce the amount of teacher-centered experiences that students get and make it more student-centered.
Which I kind of like to refer to as like making our school curriculum less fast food, more gourmet.
Yeah, I remember Ben Somerton, a colleague of mine, he described some of the experiences that students get as a happy meal. The idea of things are kind of set, there are parameters, things are already kind of decided for the students, and the students are there just to get information, to get the content knowledge. There might be some critical thinking, but not much application and choice. And the opposite of that would be something that's more open-ended and allows students to ask questions, investigate, and then use that information to do something really cool.
And I kind of would add on to that a little bit, like that idea of the happy meal being like these one-off experiences that kids have that are kind of quick and easy activities that then quick, easy fix for an afternoon. I think this analogy also kind of extends out further, just this idea of like a fast food educational curriculum around like ready-made packaged systems, whether it's for math or English reading, whatever it happens to be, are not necessarily all bad, and we're going to talk about that today, is that like there's a place and a time for fast food, but there's also a place and time for thinking about like your overall health and whether or not you want that all the time. But also, I think moving away from a one-size-fits-all solution that's just pre-packaged, ready to go out to 100 people, and then thinking about really critically about what's for the best experience for your individual students you have at school. That's where there's kind of some friction sometimes, is that some of these big models are a little bit fast food more than they are like thinking about the individual players in your particular school system.
Yeah, in our context, being in an international school and living in different countries, anytime we want to have fast food, let's say, for example, McDonald's, we know it's going to taste pretty much the same as back home. What comes to mind in education for me is the curriculum manuals. Whichever class you go into, you're going to find a similar experience. And that's the power of the curriculum manuals.
And so in that regard, where there is a place for it, that it provides some continuity, I think there's also a situation where it takes away opportunities for creativity and for autonomy of teachers to tailor experiences to the kids that are in the room. And it's not to say that you can't do that within like a prescribed curriculum, but it does reduce opportunities for instance, a student saying halfway through a science experiment about plants, what does a banana tree look like? And then being able to take them there. I think the problem is it's not that teachers can't go that way. I think one of the big problems is that unless you're a really confident teacher, you won't go that way sometimes, because people will often err on the side of following the program and making sure they're like towing the line rather than thinking about what's best for their students, like creating, like we talked last week about a kind versus a wicked learning environment, and having those kind of more open-ended wicked activities where the kids have to drive learning themselves. Those pre-made curriculums, like we say, they have a place where you just need to get things done and get through your term. At the same time, they sometimes inhibit opportunities to maybe go in a different direction that's maybe a bit more creative and exciting for your kids in your class.
Yeah, and going off what you said about maybe a newer teacher it would be beneficial to have these curriculum manuals. But I think also it can take a confident teacher who takes initiative, who has experience and knows what to do. But when you're kind of forced to go step by step and read off um, these lessons and do exactly what it says, I feel you can kind of lose your way in a sense, and again, and then lose your confidence as well. And going off what you said about creativity, I think when you allow a teacher to be creative with their lesson planning and their units, and they dive deep into that whole planning part, that gets them excited, and that motivates them, and you can see that passion in them, and that really helps the students also be engaged as well because of that passion. Taking away the creativity part, I believe, can hinder a teacher's passion.
I was thinking today about bringing this analogy like further and further. And so I'm thinking about the fast food chain kind of analogy, the idea of how employees operate within those systems. So I'm not saying that all schools are like McDonald's, but what I am suggesting is that like in those systems, creativity is not encouraged. So for instance, like I happened to work at McDonald's for 6 years when I was through middle school, high school, and into college. One of the things that happens in McDonald's is like everything is by the letter, and that's why like a cheeseburger tastes the same in Singapore as it does in Chicago as it does in Tokyo, because everything's the same. And so employees within that system, they're rewarded for compliance in the systems, and then also in terms of like even just like a management structure, it's all about like how do you keep things the same all the time. Again, this is a long bow of this analogy, and it's taking it to its nth degree. But I do think when education systems get too reliant on these kind of big package curriculums, then you lose a lot of autonomy and freedom for teachers, which then means you lose a lot of creativity and innovation. There are ways to work within these systems, and I think part of it is just being a confident teacher, like you mentioned earlier. But I kind of hope that some of the things that we talked about, particularly like last week when we talked about wicked and kind learning environments and providing kids the opportunity to inquire and like to not have all the answers in one place and to be able to go in their own direction. I kind of feel like trying to mix those things into these curriculums can make them just a lot more beneficial for learners in your classroom.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like it's going backward. You would think a traditional classroom, it would be where everyone gets the same type of instruction, and not really thinking about the students' preferences, passions, interests, the way they like to learn, etc. Obviously, with the analogy of fast food is working. I mean, there's a lot of customers for fast food, and I wonder why would a teacher like fast food curriculum?
Yeah, and maybe even like because I have been pretty dark on this topic right today, I do think there is a light to it, and there is a point where it's positive, and I think some of those Dave and I were talking in the office about this today. Is like there's a time and a place like when when we're coming back from our homes to Singapore and we've been on a plane for 16 hours and you arrive in an airport, it's amazing to go and get fast food because it's quick, it's easy, you know what you're going to get, and it's simple. And I think the same in education. There are times when, maybe there's a concept that it's difficult to teach. It requires like a lot of planning and a lot of organization. And it's not necessarily a big part of your curriculum. It's just a small thing you need to teach. There's no reason why we shouldn't be using those sort of those ready-made curriculums that are able to direct teach these concepts really quick in a way that is maybe enjoyable for the kids and also gets the outcome at the end. So because at the end of the day, like teachers don't have 48 hours in a day. They have 24 like everybody else. You have to balance out like how much time and effort you're going to put into making this super awesome varied curriculum versus like I need to teach this content and then move on to the next part.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we have McDonald's, but there's also Shake Shack, a higher version of fast food experiences. And one education version that comes to mind is Mystery Science. Like, I personally love Mystery Science. I'm a huge fan of Doug, and I feel like he designs really cool experiences that are engaging and really help students understand the concepts. Units shouldn't just be Mystery Science, but I feel like Mystery Science should be at least a part of units because they do help students learn very well. So
I think another one that we could talk about is the Lego Spike Prime kits that we're using at the moment. We use these robotics kits with our students, and this week we happen to be doing some activities with third grade. Again, it's like a ready-made package. It steps the kids through the build and through the coding step by step, but it has its purpose. Like coding and robotics can be really laborious to teach. I say laborious. It just takes a long time sometimes, and one thing I do like about Spike Prime is it scaffolds it for every kid. Maybe what could be built into that program is a bit more directed extension in terms of like where kids can take things. But that being said, that's what we're there for, and we provide that. But I think that's another good example of like a ready-made curriculum that is really valuable and useful for teachers as well. One thing I do wonder about is having like, I think would be valuable for teachers is like an honest review system where looking at these curriculums that all the advertising comes from the company itself, and they're like, it's amazing and it's perfect, and like the reviews come from kids that they've hand selected and all those sort of things. And I do wonder if there's space somewhere on the internet where these curriculums can be reviewed critically by teachers who are involved in them, so that people coming to them new can have like a more realistic and like honest understanding of what it might entail in their school setting.
But thinking about curriculum manuals, if I was tasked to create one, I wouldn't have to think about the context, the school, the specific school, and the students. I would only have to think about the age, appropriateness, and the standards that are involved. But when you do that, your big creative idea that might be really engaging slowly becomes like this light version of it. And that's because you're trying to create something for everybody. And I think that's very limiting as well.
I do think you're right. Like we have some experience where we design activities for other teachers to teach. It gives me an appreciation for what some of these big companies are doing, creating all these curriculum documents that you're really trying to work out, like what's the middle road that you can create this activity such that anyone who's a teacher in a classroom can pick it up, read it, and make it happen. So it's not, it's that idea of like when you design for average, you design for no one, where these curriculums being built for multiple school districts and countries and whatever else. It does become very difficult to create an engaging lesson that will be engaging not only for the students but for the teacher as well.
Absolutely. When you have a project and you're able to connect to the community, the culture, it becomes more alive than just getting it off a website with a generic lesson plan or a unit. I mean, this whole conversation reminds me of what you were talking about. There was a group that was building an airplane and then something about designing the seats.
Yeah,
you remember?
So that's the designing for average. Yeah, it's the US military, and they took all these Air Force pilots, took all their dimensions, chest, height, legs, arms, everything, because they had this issue with pilots who were using the same plane, so multiple pilots using the same plane, and they would get in, the seat didn't fit, it wasn't the right size. So what they decided to do is they'd take, it was like 10,000 pilots or however many, they would work out what the average was and make a seat that was the average size so that everyone would fit in this average size seat. But then when you look at that, like if you look at average, like if the average starts up here and ends down here, and you design a seat here, it doesn't fit that person, it doesn't fit that person, it doesn't fit any of these people except for maybe one person in the middle. But largely it's not even that person. So it's that idea that when you design for average, you design for nobody. And that's how the culmination of that story is that's how they came to make seats that had variable adjustments. So like the lumbar support and like changing the size of the side and the headrest and things like that in a modular kind of situation so that it can be adjusted to individuals rather than the average.
I mean, that solution right there, that sounds like personalized learning.
It sounds like it, yeah. So I brought a couple of cards from the idea wall today. And these are actually cards that I made a few years ago. And the first one is it's a quote from Jocko Willink, and it is discipline equals freedom. And the idea like to plan for success. So like if you're disciplined, like you have your things are organized, you stay on track, you're getting things done, like you have freedom in that because you know what you're doing.
That could be a whole podcast episode. There's some strategies for that.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it's hard to do.
And then an adaptation to that at the time I was talking to someone about is like this idea that agility equals freedom. And I think within school settings particularly, that idea that like when things go wonky or something doesn't work quite well, being in a position where you either have the creativity, well, you kind of need to have like the creativity, freedom, and autonomy to be able to like turn quickly and pivot. That's really important, and I think it's something that we don't always put a lot of value in schools. I think the idea around agility and autonomy for teachers is something that schools could really benefit from, because it means that you're always thinking about like what's best for my students and what's going to be the most engaging and like purposeful sort of lesson and activity that I can do with them. But anyway, I thought it's interesting, like that idea of like the extension. If you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a problem.
If you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball.
What?
But the agility, like, and that idea that like the quick pivot, which is
Yeah.
something that they always talk about with Google and big tech startups,
Yeah.
is something that we should really embrace in education. Which I think is part of that fast food culture of curriculum. Sometimes is it doesn't always allow for that agility to move in a different direction if you need to for some reason or another.
Yeah. And even in the macro level, I'm currently leading a technology, computer science, and robotics engineering review for the school. And that's something that we hope to embed. We have some recommendations, but within that recommendation or the implementation of the recommendations, we want agility. So having pilots going, having constant feedback, improving things constantly, and also having that option to pivot as well, and not just do exactly what the implementation plan says, but really be critical thinkers and be agile. Well, that was really awesome. I was super excited to talk about this topic, just because it was called fast food. Now it's just got me really hungry, so I'm ready to go home and eat.
Yeah, 2 Big Macs and a large fries on the side.
You're lucky you live right next to a McDonald's.
True. It's the truth. So,
All right. Well, until next time, be the iceberg.
and climb your mountain.